Hello and welcome to the Brand Hunch podcast, where we explore ideas and hunches around how marketers are growing great brands. It's a look under the hood at how much is marketing science and how much is built on a hunch. Today, my guest is Dan Robertson-Jones. Dan's background lies firmly in the research and strategy space, first at Blaze Research, then Added Value, and for the past 11 years, he's been at Kantar, with 5 of these as partner across culture, futures and strategy, which I'm excited to unpack. If you didn't already know, Kantar's a world-leading marketing data and analytics business working with the world's top companies, including most of the top 100 biggest advertisers. We have worked together across various clients. Our team love working with you and your team, Dan, the overarching sentiment being that it's just quality work and with super smart people. I'll get you to explain a little bit more about Kantar's work in a minute, but firstly, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So take me back to the early days of your career. I think you studied sociology at uni. Where did you head from there?
Cool. So I knew from uni that I was super interested in culture, how the world worked, how it was changing, and the kind of landing point that more by accident than by design, if I'm honest, was into the world of market research. Initially, as an intern for 2 days to help a company move office. So I did much more packing boxes than I did talking to people. But I was inquisitive, persistent, and those 2 days turned into 10 years working with the same agency in London, which was a pretty phenomenal experience. I think I was incredibly lucky when I first landed. Well, after we'd finished unpacking said boxes, my first 2 projects were the global redesign of Johnnie Walker Red and the initial launch of Smirnoff Ice, which then cascaded into more or less 4 years working pretty heavily with Diageo. Johnnie Walker Red became Johnnie Walker Blue, became green, became platinum gold packaging redesigns, and that moved into their 6 premium whiskies, global redesign of Gordon's Gin, Tanqueray, etc., which kept me busy for a long period of time. And as I said, it was an incredibly lucky landing place. I had a team at the agency who were patient and indulging of me. So I got a brilliant schooling in the world of research, but with that also an incredible exposure, not just to the client world and how that insight lands and the decisions that are made with it, but to the broader agency village. So we spent a lot of time in those early years working in the offices of Bloom and of JFK and Enterprise IG and Landor and Smith & Co., working through the insight, translating it into what it meant for the packaging. So I was incredibly fortunate not just to have an education in insight and how research works, but where it goes after that through to the point of execution.
Incredible. And how much of your research was hands-on tasting the product versus theory?
At the end of the Smirnoff redesign, when it moved from like the classic kind of old school bell jar to the new bottle shape as it was in 2002, we did have a very extensive competitive set that had to find a new home. So my housemates at that point were very happy with me. I came home with about 60 bottles of vodka.
And so casting your mind back to those days, what did market research mean then and how's it evolved to today?
I think it was I'm sure it's a theme we'll touch on as we go through this conversation. I started that journey in 2000, and I think research had a much clearer and simpler remit. I was learning to work with tabs and write surveys and run focus groups and do the analysis off the back of those sessions. But it was a very linear world, and I think everything was back at that point. So, markets, economists talk about it as the era of the great moderation, but markets were predictable. Consumer sentiment behavior was reasonably predictable. Therefore, you had fewer variables to deal with and more time to deliver them. So I think if you fast forward to now, the 2 big shifts that we've seen are insight's everywhere, right? There is multitudes of it. No company is wanting for insight, but understanding how to focus it and how to apply it has become hugely more important, not just into, as it was then, packaging design and innovation and the kind of fundamentals of marketing, but across pretty much all aspects of business. I think the importance of consumer centricity in everything that you do has grown so much and become such a strong predictor of business growth. The kind of work you're fielding and engaging with has changed dramatically. And the second big shift is the need for speed of response in that almost real time. And we're seeing this, now with the emergence of generative AI, with synthetic data, how can we make decisions not just in a week's time, but in 6 minutes, 2 hours? How quickly can we turn it around and respond? So everyone's world is very different from 2 decades ago. But I think those 2, the need to be able to work with more data and more data sources to apply that to an increasing range of different business problems, and for some of those problems to be able to do it almost at the speed of the machine, if you like.
Huge shift. So at some point, I'm assuming in your journey, you moved to Australia.
Well,
Where
yeah.
did you land? And
So
what?
the other thing that Link gave me, other than a great schooling in the broad world of marketing, was a wife. She pitched up at the agency a couple of years after I did. We got together a couple of years after that, married a couple of years after that, and then moved to Australia in 2010. And I think it kind of started the second period of my career, if you like. So I freelanced for a bit, got used to being in Australia, and then worked at quite a small boutique agency. It was 3 people on the day I joined and then 2 people a week later. And it gave me exposure in kind of running business, and not just from the point of view of talent attraction and retention, and the world of insight and research in Australia was incredibly fragmented. So there were lots of options. It was an employees market more than an employer's market. But running the business, but also kind of growing key client accounts and how do we manage that. And it was a great next step. And it being a small agency, bigger, I will say, by the time I left, it gave me the kind of next natural step in my career, I think.
And then that led you eventually to Kantar. You were there for quite some time, though.
Yeah, I spent 5 years at Blaze. Loved it. I think all good things came to an end. So I was kind of looking for the next challenge. I mean, it's by chance and the good gestures of kind people. I found myself interviewing at, as it was then, Added Value. 2 days after my second son had been born,
Wow.
slightly exhausted. And then 2 days later, I joined. And again, I think I got lucky really quickly. I joined initially as in a qualitative researcher role, but pretty quickly that turned into a role in cultural insight and cultural strategy, which, harking back to my kind of sociology degree, that fascination with how does the world work and how are things changing, started to kind of focus more and more on challenging the assumptions around brand building, around marketing, and how you do it in a world that even back then, I think I joined in 2014, you could already see it really beginning to change. And what do we need to break in the old models of marketing and growth? Since then, the 11 years, good Lord, as Added Value turned into Kantar and etc., has really been kind of pursuing that thought. How do we build more powerful brands? How do you have to do that in a world that's changing? And what does that mean for how you support clients in executing that across the mix?
2 questions just back on your research days. Firstly, what is it like married to someone that's also worked within a research agency? How do you guys make decisions, and are you incredibly thorough with your research now?
I would love to say we are, but the truth is we're absolutely not. I mean, it definitely helps. Particularly now, I think, to have someone that talks the same language and you can bounce ideas around with. I think the kind of the in-depth research, actually, Kel loves this. She's researching something and she's working on a QSR brand, and suddenly we start getting it for dinner and competitors.
Brilliant. And second question, what do you think differentiates good or average research from great research?
So I think there are fundamentals of good research. You know, your ability to kind of get to the human truths, to understand deep human motivations, particularly in qual, around what drives behavior. And the role of research, obviously, I think, fundamentally is always how do you connect a business to its market. And whether that comes through traditional sources or whether clients are finding that through data, secondary sources of data, I think is increasingly a bit of a mute distinction. What differentiates really strong research is not just to bring that kind of understanding of market and people into a room and to be able to communicate that, but to be able to communicate it with 2 key drivers of differentiation, one of which is to inspire a room, to be able to structure all of that content, and we're drowning in data, right? To pick out what's important, to be able to identify the kind of story beats and what are the things you need to know if you're seeing this for the first time to be able to logically step through it and understand it. And secondly, to be able to land that not just into the context of the marketing challenge or the brand challenge or the business question, but to do it in the context of the business itself. You've got to understand not just how one business operates, but the people in the business and how do you connect with those. So I think, with that, stakeholder engagement at the start of a project becomes more important than just going off and writing a survey. The understanding how it's going to land and helping it land, I think, is the thing that actually makes a client's job, whether they're a brand person or a marketing person or an innovation person or an internal insight person, you've got an opportunity to land and to line a room around a story, or you're going to spend weeks, if not months, getting everyone on the same page.
What are your thoughts on the role of focus groups?
I think for certain types of questions where it is useful understanding human motivations and behaviors around a category, or if you're looking to co-create to some degree and build stuff with people, then having people in a room for a period of time where they can spar off each other and be reminded of things with each other or build consensus collectively, and that's essentially what good facilitation does, is really, really powerful. I think there is, for certain questions, there's little substitute for getting people into a room and structuring a conversation.
And where do you think it doesn't work?
In the traditional limitation of qual research focus groups is obviously scale. So you've got a smaller sample than you would do for a quantitative piece of work. I think there are more and more, we have run online panels over a period of time, like a number of days. I think, the flexibility you've got with that to be able to put people into groups or to ask them questions individually, and the ability to let questions settle in people's minds so you get a more considered response and more insight into their world. I mean, videos and tasks and tours of homes that are difficult to do in a homework task, or impossible to do, frankly, if you're in a focus group room somewhere in the middle of Sydney. You can get a deeper understanding and more considered responses around kind of classically ethnographic work and certain types of questions if you're engaging people online. I still think it has a role. Unquestionably, it has a role. That role has become more precise in the context of the multitude of sources that you can gain insight from now, and the different ways of gathering, collecting, and synthesizing data points, whether they're qualitative or quantitative.
As an agency, Cello is obviously positioned as a creative agency, and Kantar is very much in the research and strategy space. So it may be different. But one of the things we sometimes have is marketers coming to us saying, yeah, we kind of want to skip the research phase and get into the making. We sort of know some things and we can stitch it together. What would you say to that? And if you did have $100 to get an idea through to something that is some sort of creative idea, how much of that would you spend on the research phase?
It's a great question. So let me figure out the maths in just a moment. Your creative is obviously so important in terms of building salience in market, in our language at least. I think there's two things to say. Probably consumers are effectively bombarded with messaging, and we know from work that we've done looking at how influence actually works today. If you aren't resonant with their world, if you don't look familiar to them, then you're never going to cut through. So I think if you were to bypass honing, developing, creating the kind of the core idea, its execution with consumers, you're not asking them to don a beret and assess the work, but the 20% you can add on to what you already understand in terms of how to sharpen an idea and how to sharpen its execution to make it really sing in market, I think is invaluable. Particularly, I think, early testing gives you direction, and there's obviously more cost-effective ways to do that now. But I think it just makes such a difference to what you eventually take to market, to understand how you can cut through and how you can create something that's engaging. So if I use an example of that, if I may, I think, when we worked on the development of the original strategy for Share a Coke, and the original idea that came into that process with Coke and with Ogilvy globally was there would be certain top 300 names, I think it was in Australia, would be printed in place of the Coke typeface on the cans, which is, that was a cool idea. It would have worked really well for the summer and raised engagement, which particularly with certain audiences, which was the objective for it. A couple of quick focus groups somewhere in Parramatta on a Wednesday night, you kind of see people where the shift came from around actually it was much more valuable to people if they could give that can to somebody else. And the feeling that people had at the time when we were looking at that, we were already seeing rising levels of isolation and loneliness, declining numbers of close friends. Then it pivoted the way the strategy behind the idea. And from that came the printing of cans and all of the stuff we've seen since with that. But then you suddenly got an idea that's hugely resonant with people that you can roll for years and years and years, and it keeps its freshness and its relevance.
I was going to ask you about the role of early testing and whether that is more effective than it is prohibitive. And have you seen I'm assuming you've seen a lot of upsides if you're in favour of early testing, but is there ever a downside of asking too much of people before an idea is fully developed?
So you have to be careful what you ask, I think, is the kind of the long and the short of it. And in two senses, showing scamped ideas. People respond really differently if they're seeing something that looks finished or if it looks scamped.
Mm.
So if it looks like it's scamped, then people will tend to work with it. And if you are exploring that with consumers, then the effectiveness of the end campaign that you take to market is doubled. It's the long and the short of it, more or less. So I think in those early stages, just light touch, understanding of actually how do we shape the idea and shape the direction of the work that comes off the back of it, obviously, to make it more resonant with people, more relevant to people is a game changer.
And how do you define a good insight? What does it mean to you? And is it just a gut instinct where you go, oh, that's it?
I think we work in the business of ideas. So short answer and a long answer to this one, if I can. The definition of an insight I really like is a truth that's not yet seen. So you have to bring something new to it, if that makes sense, or a new way of seeing things. I think, increasingly we are working in collaboration and in parallel with agencies and clients. I think we all work in the business of ideas. Brands are essentially, like at the core of a great brand is an idea. That idea can flex over time. It can be expressed in different ways. It can be applied to different campaigns. I think there's a moment when you're kind of going through work where you feel it, right? There's an energy because it changes the way that you see the world. I think, great insight, all of the stuff that we do is your method acting essentially. And if the project doesn't make you see something new or see the world slightly differently or join dots between things that kind of line up a different way of seeing the world, then you've not really done your job. So I think you know it, you feel it, and you just get better at structuring the process and the patterns that you recognise to get you to that place.
So give me a little bit of a spiel about Kantar. I think you're over 20,000 people internationally. You're in over 90 markets. I think there's a couple of areas to the business. Give me the quick overview.
Yeah, cool. So we are the world's largest insight, research and marketing strategy business. As you said, we have presence it's about 26,000 people in the business globally at the moment. We have headquartered presences in 26 markets, but a kind of broader presence through the network in over 90. It is a complicated beast. We've spent quite a lot of the last couple of years going through really a kind of integration of what was until, 5-6 years ago, a whole multitude of different businesses under one corporate name. So we were part of WPP. What we've done in that time, I think, we've done a couple of key things. There's been a lot of investment into AI solutions and speed of testing. So whether that's innovation, creative, and we've put at the heart of the business brand-driven growth. It's the most tested model of brand-driven growth ever. There's 1 billion brand data points, I think 5.4 billion retail points. But actually, how do you drive penetration and price point? And how does that then translate across the marketing mix of this full service, whether it's innovation, whether it's sustainability, whether it's creative, et cetera, et cetera? How do you then cascade that? So that, if you like, is the big picture of Kantar. Within it, there is insight expertise and then marketing strategy expertise. And those kind of two functions are kind of how I divide that world in my head, and I sit on the latter side of those now.
Amazing. And when a new client comes to you, are you typically working with C-suite or senior marketers? And what are some of the common questions they're looking to solve?
We probably work with quite a range of clients, not just across sectors and geographies out of the Australian office, but across different business functions and levels of seniority. So quite a lot of the work that we do will come through the CMO or senior brand practitioners leads within client businesses. And classically, probably what we do is help them to build kind of three functions: growth strategy, their brand strategy and execution, and then their operational performance are the areas where we tend to focus most.
And what have been one or a couple of your most sort of proud projects you've worked on at Kantar?
I think, as I said before, the brand we all work in the business of ideas and ideas that can connect with people and fuel growth. And I think the projects that I've felt that hold the best memories for me, I think, are where we've kind of challenged and overcome conventions, be it of brand or of categories. So it was a relatively small piece of work, but we worked with the Australian Olympic Association as they had a global mandate to increase engagement with the Olympics outside of the cycle of the games. And what the project itself did was to distill the essence of the Olympics into a meaningful, essentially a value proposition for people. What lies at the heart of the Olympics that is differentiating for it. which was the idea of fulfillment rather than the idea of winning golds. That translated into a program which we worked with their education experts for alumni to take into schools as part of their Unleashed campaign. And I think what made me proud about it was we saw a business, we saw the organization kind of remember what made it amazing. So they refurbed their offices, the gold medals went out, the Olympic torches came in because that's a more powerful symbol of hope and fulfillment. The alumni who they were engaging had a story suddenly that they could take in, and the 4 steps to fulfillment and how they went through it and why that's relevant to kids of primary and secondary school ages. The Pierre de Coubertin Award became the Unleashed Award. So I think all of this stuff matters when it makes an impact. Brands are meant to make an impact in people's lives and have a positive impact. And that campaign is now, the relationship with the Olympics now in its 10th year. So that has rolled out to about 300,000 school kids across different states. The alumni are more engaged and clearer on what they're walking into schools to do. And we've changed the way the organisation sees itself.
Amazing.
We've done work with AAA and health insurance to change a category convention away from a kind of you die, we pay to you live longer and have a better life through our help. So
do you think all brands should have this much sort of weight to them? Obviously, I'm interested in your perspective on brand purpose. Do you think that brands should be having cultural clout, or is it asking too much?
So I don't think it has to be grandiose, right? And I think purpose sometimes takes us away from the point. Brands are powerful when they are like meaning and difference, how Kantar measures brands, meaning, difference, and salience, but meaning and difference only matter in the kind of the lives of consumers. So I do think today it's an imperative that brands understand what makes them meaningful to people in the context of, the brands are built in the context of culture, not categories. So you have to understand how are people shifting and what are they looking for and where are you relevant to it. I think you have to understand how does that turn up in culture. So how do you talk a culturally resonant language if you want your marketing to turn up in the right way? And I think you have to understand that direction if you want to fuel innovation that's not just feeding a cycle of the same. It matters because consumers' relationships with brands have changed massively, and we're no longer running towards brands in the ways that we might have done in the heyday of late millennia, early 2000s. I think the power dynamic has shifted, and there are so many brands, and brand has become such a normal idea that great brands justify their presence in people's lives. And whether you're doing that as AAA did, or whether you're doing that, we did work with Protex antibacterial soap, which is a less altogether glamorous category, but soap, it's got a really interesting history. It's born out of Africa. Soap has saved more lives in Africa than any other innovation.
Wow.
And understanding post the pandemic that people didn't want to be saved from risk and no longer expected the world to be safe, but wanted to get on with living and be able to control the risk in their lives, reframed how we positioned the brand, how we executed the brand, and communicated brilliant technology from within the Colgate business in a way that was relevant to people in Colombia and Brazil and South Africa and Thailand. So I think the language of marketing and brand is super messy, but actually what functionally makes a great brand is that they have utility, usefulness, and resonance in your life.
Yeah, of course. And what do you think about the role of brand purpose? Has it sort of passed its use by date? Do you think having a core purpose is important for any organisation? Do you have a different terminology for it?
Think about where purpose came from. It wasn't traditionally a consumer-facing thing. And I think more and more it looks like purpose is really useful to align an organisation internally. It is really useful to set kind of mid to long term direction in terms of what are the missions and the steps you're taking towards that purpose. I think it got really messy when everybody was talking about purpose, and because purpose positioning started to become less clear and what functionally they do, whether you have a purpose or whether you don't. Some businesses we work with talk about having superpowers and a kind of key objective. There's nothing wrong with purpose, but purpose applied in the wrong context.
Confusing.
Yeah, it's confusing from the point of view of actually how do you communicate in a single-minded way. The thing I think I would differentiate is that, to my points I made earlier, like in addition to having a functional benefit and an emotional benefit, understanding your social benefit. What difference do you actually make in people's lives, or a social utility?
And so how do you define social utility? I mean, it's an obvious one, but what does it mean to the projects in which you work on?
It is a way of landing cultural context into brand. So you're still going to have your functional benefit or your functional utility. You still need to have that. And you still need to have your emotional benefit for consumers. But your social benefit or your social utility is actually what difference do you make in people's lives? And that can be grand. To your point, it can be, a kind of Patagonia-esque vision for the world. But it can also be much more mundane. But understanding where you fit in people's lives and everything we see is increasingly the driver of differentiation and growth over and above traditional models of positioning.
If you could spend the next year exploring one brand question in depth, what would that be?
I would love to pick apart sustainability. It's a topic really close to my heart. We were doing work. You mentioned the kind of projects we're proud of. One of the ones that I would mention would be getting sustainability as a core growth driver into the Hills pet food business, which is amazing. How do you talk about sustainability? Now, sustainability is everywhere. It's a bit like purpose. It's such a messy word. It's multifaceted, and it's traditionally something that other people do.
Do you think there's a growing trend of marketers becoming more aware of sustainability as not just greenwashing from a marketing perspective, but as a genuine lever for brand building?
Yes, 100%. I think everyone is aware of it. I think from the conversations we have, and we worked with the UN last year to facilitate some workshops in Australia with CMOs, the understanding of sustainability as swords and shields, right? So there are some things you are going to have to do. They will not grow your business, but they will keep you in business. There are some things, though, that should be part of your brand, will drive the power of your brand, will drive your ability to drive penetration and hold price point. I think that's there. I think what's not there yet, pretty much around the world, it's not there consistently, is the models of how you do it so that it's not just a claim.
So you do it sustainably.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Do you think is there any part of a marketer's toolkit that you think is underused or undervalued when building great brands?
I don't know if it's so much a question of what's underused as how we're going, the process by which we're going about building great brands. I do think the understanding of you need to distill brand. You almost need the big bang for a brand. So how do you get the right people in a room to align and to build and to push thinking beyond?
Do you think that has to include C-suite, as in above and beyond the marketing department, or do you think it can exist outside?
I think it's a job of marketing to take it to the C-suite. So increasingly in the work that we do outside clients, we're kind of marketers talking one language to the C-suite and one language marketing. And there are reasons for that. But it's a thing that's particularly pronounced in Australia. So there is a job for marketing to do as a strategic partner in driving brand growth to take this into the C-suite. You need C-suite buy-in. You don't need C-suite to input into the creation of a brand. I think you need people who understand how it's going to work and how it's going to be applied and what it needs to do in like a full agency mix when you're building your brand. Lots of the tools are there. I think it's the getting it tight enough so that it stays tight. And maybe to your point, if there is something that's underused, I think playbooks have kind of become a PDF that sits somewhere on a server. Actually how you cascade that consistency is the great challenge. So understanding how do you put your brand into everything, your character, not just your DBAs.
Operationalizing all the strategy.
Yeah, exactly right.
Do you think today's consumers are more brand loyal or more brand agnostic? And is it the brand's fault either way?
I think they're both. If your brand is strong, you will build loyalty. There's no question of that. That's as much a question of having consumer centricity. So if you understand your consumer, if you understand how to talk to them, how to engage them, what your role in their lives and where there is wide space to build more utility in their lives, you will make yourself useful. There are obvious examples of that. Apple being one of them. I think the great risk for a lot of brands that aren't properly built is ending up in the messy middle. So whereas 10 years ago, the kind of mainstream was a safe place to be if you were an FMCG brand, for example. I think consumers' attitudes to brands, as I said, they've shifted so that now the brand needs to do the work to engage. But I think with the cost of living crisis as well, what we're unquestionably seeing is people moving away from brands they have traditionally been loyal to and finding lower cost options that are good enough to not justify the price premium that the brands they've traditionally bought would be charging. I think if you get it right, you create loyalty over time. But if you don't get it right, you're in real danger of ending up, as I say, in that messy middle where you're neither the best and the thing I will pay more for, or the best value, which is good enough. I think you see that particularly in FMCG, but it's not just limited to that world.
And how do you future-proof a brand when things are shifting faster than they ever have before? Like cultural relevance shifts weekly, if not daily. How do you sort of set a brand up for success?
I think you have to understand culture at two levels is the first bit of this. So we will talk a lot about fast culture and slow culture. There are fast cultural trends that come through all the time. Now, those are the waves, if you like, where you actually need to stand at the currents and the shifts. So where is the world moving to below the surface? With that, you're then not looking at surface culture, which is really quick and very difficult to meaningfully leverage. But if you can understand where attitudes, aspirations, behaviors are moving towards, the job becomes much easier. Once you've understood that and you kind of understand where the tipping points are in key trends, shifts, whether that's generational change or whether that's growing mistrust and anti-incumbency or whatever that may be, then you can start to understand how you adapt. So if you understand those shifts, where are aspirations, values, beliefs, behaviors moving towards, that shifting value in the market, you can then challenge the conventions of your category to redefine the business that you're in. You can move with culture and get ahead of it rather than getting behind it, but you have to avoid the risk of chasing fast culture trends.
You've worked with a lot of marketers and senior leaders in business for many years now. What do you think are some traits of the best, let's say, marketers that you've worked with?
I think there's vulnerability in a nutshell. I think it comes in two ways. I think great marketers will get the idea at the pitch and then buy you the leeway to build it over a project process. They are, and this is on us to be clear, right? But they're attuned enough around the idea that presents the opportunity to then work with you through the process and be patient in some of the things you have to do with slow decisions, right? There's thinking fast, but there's doing fast, but there's doing slow. And I think that kind of knowing the things that you have to get right and that have to be engineered more tightly than they used to be, and building that and collaborating through that process is one aspect. There's a boldness to great marketeers. I think the second thing is when you see them in rooms, that vulnerability comes through as letting other people speak, and particularly people in teams. Having the relationship with internal teams particularly, that they foster collaboration and in the team rather than above it.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's, again, a human truth, right? Getting the best out of everyone else to shine as a cohort.
I think you lead through collaboration rather than being apart. I think that's shifted massively in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah. Is there a brand that you've admired from afar that you think, wow, they've done great work?
I look at Ollie's multivitamin brand and I think they've nailed so much that's right. And you can see it in the growth that they've had over the last 5 years. I think they recognised really early that health was changing and they reinvented a category, I think, in ways that are really attuned to cultural sentiment and a deep understanding of where they're useful in people's lives. So I think if you look at the product, they took multivitamins from being, and they weren't the only ones to do it, from being a pill that was something that you took and you didn't really notice, to being a gummy that was flavored and gave you the experience of being healthy in the moment. So they create an experience around the product. I think if you look at the way that they talk, it's vitality and vibrancy and more good health, not a pill that will stop your bones aching or magically reduce your stress formula. I think if you look at the portfolio, I love the way they talk really simply and really clearly to their usefulness in people's lives. So do you need better sleep? Do you need less stress? Do you need more libido? And I think there's just a really straightforward, simple structure to the portfolio, but the way that their products actually talk and the packaging's designed, that all comes together really nicely, brilliantly, to tap into where health was moving towards. They did it really quickly. And how do you recognize the shifts in culture, the shifts in category, the shifts in products, and the shifts in language, and bring that together in something that turns a category on its head?
Yeah, incredible. Riding the current, as you said before.
Yeah.
Which recent trend, idea, or challenge in the brand world has you most excited or concerned?
So we're talking a lot to clients at the moment around acceleration. We have spent the last, what feels like forever, talking about disruption, and then off the back of disruption, talking about the polycrisis, which is the compound effect of one disruption on top of another, on top of another. And what we see coming when we're talking to clients around the second half of this decade, and what we're seeing when we look at it, is not just that disruption is going to continue. There will be more tipping points. There'll be more sources of disruption. The world in which we operate, both from the point of view of markets and infrastructure, is going to be disrupted. It's only going to happen more. But the reality is that world is going to come at us faster, and the need to be able to respond faster is going to differentiate those who grow and those who struggle. I think it is incredibly exciting on the one hand, because with that comes opportunity, and understanding how that world is changing and what do you do about it is a fantastically interesting and important question to address. It is also, it's challenging, right? I think the biggest challenge that we will have is differentiating the questions that you need to do quickly, or what you need to do quickly, versus unilaterally working at pace and understanding the questions that you need to do slowly. So, as I've spoken about before, I think as the pace at which businesses need to operate accelerates, you need to get some stuff right, and getting it right becomes more important. And there is some stuff you need to do quickly and course correct. I think the tools are there. I think the challenge will be understanding which questions are which, and avoiding, particularly getting the do it slowly, do it once, do it right, get everyone right on it, and then go, is for everyone where the biggest challenge will be for businesses, for brands, for marketing, and our role in driving growth into the future is going to sit there.
Amazing. It's been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Some great examples, and I think definitely got me thinking about the role of research and the importance of honing what you think you know to that really clear insight. So thank you so much, Dan.
That's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
My biggest takeaway from chatting with Dan, other than the fact that research is incredibly important in getting to an insight as a jump-off point for creative work, is sustainability as a driver for marketers into the future. It's something I've heard some brands talk about, but nobody in our world that's fully adopted it as part of marketing's toolkit, which I think is one to watch.